Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics Ukraine War Update extra video where I give you the extra information and tidbits to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. This is actually the second half of a video I did yesterday. Um, I have quite a busy day, so actually, when I'm speaking to you now, I am speaking yesterday, although it's today for you. I've got quite a busy day on Sunday, so I might not be able to do the extra. So here's at least part of an extra or something that acts as an extra. I hope you get something out of this. Please uh, take on board that it's not the finished product or something. Anyway, enough nonsense. I'm going to go first to Mick Ryan and talk about Bakmut. Okay, we're going to go to Bakmut now, and I'm going to talk you through a Mick Ryan thread, and then I want to say like a little personal bit on Bakmut, a bit of I don't know where I'm going to go with it because it's a stream of consciousness is what I say. I just have a slight idea of what I might say, and then it comes out, and then I listen. Is a bit of oh, I could do some philosophy here. It's epiphenomenalism, the idea that your consciousness is actually an afterthought, and really it's your non-conscious brain that does the work, and the consciousness is this realization of that work, but that work's already been done. So you think your consciousness is driving, but actually it's reflecting. And sometimes when I speak, all the time when I speak, I listen to myself speak and go, "Oh yeah, that was good," or I go, "Oh no, that was rubbish," and then I stop and then re-record it or whatever. In other words, it's my non-conscious brain that's driving it. Anyway, that's a bit of philosophy, but we won't go there. Oh, I've gone there. Okay, Mick Ryan, shut up, Piss. The Battle of Bakhmut has now raged since August 2022. The massive human and material resources expended by Russians on this objective may soon necessitate a Ukrainian withdrawal. And we might be seeing that today, or might be seeing the start of it. We shall see. Back in October last year, I examined how withdrawals are conducted and some of their considerations for the Russians in Kherson. I will apply a similar approach to the Ukrainian armed forces in Bakhmut. Withdrawals, which are considered a retrograde operation in US Army doctrine, are designed to allow a force to disengage from the enemy and redeploy on a new mission or to a new location while minimizing casualties. This quote from the Australian Army doctrine is also useful. Quote, withdrawal is a task employed regularly during mobile defense or the delay to accomplish the overall aim of resuming offensive action. It should be treated as a routine tactic rather than a harbinger of disaster. For Ukraine, holding on to Bakhmut would have had a political imperative. This battle has been invested with political value by both sides, although only one president, Zelensky, has had the courage to visit the troops there. The battle for the town and area around it has also been the source of an open, vicious campaign of smears between the Russian army and the Wagner group. But the battle has also allowed Ukraine to trick the Russian forces in the east, forcing them to continue committing resources to the battle for a town with almost no strategic value. This has absorbed Russian units that might have been used elsewhere against the Ukrainians. It has blooded the Russians, army and Wagner, in a way they have not experienced since World War II. By some reports, their slow, methodical, and frankly unnecessary campaign for Bakhmut has resulted in over 10,000 Russian casualties. But at some point in the coming days, the Ukrainian armed forces may decide that they have achieved all they can by remaining in their defensive locations around Bakhmut, and that force preservation for the battles that follow is more important. Once a decision is made to withdraw, uh, what are the planning considerations? And let's just have a little look at the map. I actually forgot to go through the war map and Bakhmut map this morning in my map update. So here is Bakhmut. You can see it's thoroughly surrounded, particularly from the north. There's this growing salient moving to the west, Bodanivka, Dubova Vasilivka, although some Russian mappers have that as being under Russian control already. I'm not sure. There's potential some counterattacking, giving the Ukrainians some breathing space down in the southwest by Ivanivska. But you can see that it is generally not looking good. There's a destroyed bridge here to the east over the Bakhmutivka River, and then another destroyed bridge over a waterway for the um, this main supply route to the north that leaves really only some smaller roads, maybe in between the two main supply roads that are somewhat open. And really, the T0504 being the only remaining possible supply route, which is arguably why, or almost certainly why, the Ukrainians are doing their counterattacks down the south. They've looked at these two roads and must have thought, right, the one that has the best is the best course, or the most viable route to defend and to use is the one down south. So we're going to do our counterattacking down there and use that to get our equipment and troops out. So that's what's going on in Bakmut. Once a decision is made to withdraw, what are the planning considerations? First, deception is vital. The reality is, however, that it is hard to conceal from the Russians an intention to withdraw. Some deception might be achieved by increased fire support, decoys, simulating normal activities, and communications discipline. The second consideration is how to sequence the withdrawal. This includes when and how to evacuate logistics stocks, headquarters, recon elements, and ground combat forces. It will depend on where and in what strength the enemy is pressing the force that is to withdraw. For the Ukrainians, it is likely some of this has already been done, but the Ukrainians will need enough forces to place with their own mobility to prevent a rout, but not so much that they lose a large part of the force. A third, so just to translate that, basically, if you're going to leave a lot of forces around to make sure you can safely get everything, as much stuff out as possible, the larger you force you leave to do that kind of withdrawal, if they get caught out, the more forces you might lose. So you want to only have a small force doing that rear action. But if it's too small, then you get a rout. And if it's too big, you could lose that much, or well, yeah. So you've got to get some kind of happy medium there, some optimum. A third consideration for the Ukrainians will be disrupting the Russians' ability to interfere with the withdrawal. We should expect to see increased air defense, jamming, and artillery used by the withdrawing Russians, as well as greater air support. I think he means Ukrainians there. So he's probably copy and pasted that from his one before about Kherson. A fourth consideration will be command and control. This isn't just about who is in charge; it is about controlling an orderly withdrawal in the planned sequence. MPs are vital for road space control, route discipline, and ensuring units don't vacate defensive positions early. So those are military police, I would have thought. Achieving control is also about good battle discipline. Tactical leaders at all levels must hold their positions until they're assigned a withdrawal time. This can be very difficult when there is a strong inclination to move rearwards earlier than a direct plan directs. So what that is to say is, imagine you're just over here, and your job is to hold in quite a skeletal manner this axis here, right on the south, and you need to do that to allow the people from the west to get out and the people from the center to get out. But if you start panicking and you're put under a lot of pressure, and actually there's not many of you there, and you go, right, we need to get out, everyone's withdrawing, let's go, then you pull out there, then that screws up all these people that are pulling out, because then suddenly they are cut off, etc., etc. So it, it's a really delicate thing to get right. And there are so many things that can go wrong. The Ukrainians will want to achieve a clean break. This is a disengagement of the Russians in a way that avoids their ability to follow up and pursue the withdrawing force. A lot of artillery attacking concentrations of Russian reinforcements and fire support will be required. Key to achieving a clean break is an effective rear guard. A rear guard force can help provide a clean break for the withdrawing force and prevent enemy pursuit. I would expect that for the Ukrainians, the rear guard would consist of armored and mounted infantry forces. Ultimately, a successful withdrawal requires excellent planning and coordination, but this is underpinned by good leadership at all levels. But concept for how the withdrawal will be sequenced and executed must be unified and led by a senior commander. This senior commander must have excellent tactical acumen, good understanding of the terrain, and a good appreciation of the capabilities of the withdrawing force. He must understand that getting it wrong can result in the loss of the entire withdrawing force. The reality is that if Russia captures Bakhmut, they are seizing rubble. It is a town with little strategic importance and no infrastructure to support a force. That the Russians have invested so much in its capture speaks volumes about their poor strategy in this war. For the Ukrainians, they will be withdrawing into defensive zones around Kramatorsk that they have had 8 years to prepare. 8 years, and it is on higher, more defensible ground than Bakhmut, and indeed Chasiv Yar, which is just to the west. While Ukraine may lose a town, the Russians have lost much more over the course of the battle. They have wasted military units, soldiers, and resources that would have been valuable to them once the Ukrainians launch in offensives later in the spring. The irony of this battle is that while Russia is desperate for a victory in the short term, Putin often talks of how patient Russia is and how it will outlast the West. There's little in Russian behavior at present that supports Putin's view. Now, I want to just have a little muse about the idea that there's a calculation that has been done, and this is clearly, everyone's been communicating this. There's been a calculation that it has been worth it for the Ukrainians to hold in Bakmut for as long as possible. So what you're doing is you're on paper, really, it's a really abstract calculation, and you are having to you have to disconnect from the emotional and human consequences of this. And you're basically saying, right, and I'm going to completely make these numbers up. These are completely made up numbers. But you might say, right, we are losing 100 Ukrainian troops a day, but the Russians are losing 500 troops a day. And so, therefore, if we keep doing that, if we do that for as long as possible, this will have a far greater impact on the Russian forces. Although it has a big impact on our forces, it's such a greater impact on the Russian forces that it is worth doing. If we pulled out to Chaziv Yar, for example, and we had a nice straight line going up and down here, and we got back to us losing sort of 20 people and them losing, I don't know, 70 people and a day's combat around there, then but here at the moment they're losing 500. Yes, we're losing 100, but they're losing 500. That is just worth it. Again, figures for um, figures made up. So you whatever. Uh, Now, the point I wanted to make is that imagine being one of those people or a unit of those people that you understand this. You understand that there is this calculation going on, and you're a unit that's sent into there. And basically, you recognize that you are just a sacrificial number, that your entire life has come down to you being fed into this meat grinder for good reason. You understand the reasoning and you agree with the reasoning, but you're the one that's there. And you've got a really high probability of dying. You are dying so that 5 others die on the opposing side. This isn't the kind of to me, this is heroism, right? If you are the person that decides to do that, this is true heroism because it's not the sort of hero of myth and legend. You're this one person that does this amazing stuff, and these stories get written about you, and you are the center of that narrative, the story. The story here isn't about this one person because there are thousands of these thousands of these individuals. So your heroism gets lost amongst that, but it is no less heroic. Arguably, it's more heroic. There's something to be said about morality. Whereas if you um, virtue signal your morality, if you tell everyone how wonderful you're being, oh, I've just done this and I've given this to charity or I've helped this person, then it becomes more about you than the actual act and the goodness of that act. Whereas if you go and do that thing but literally tell no one, we had a discussion about that. By the way, ATP comes from atypical philosopher. We used to meet once a month. Tipple is a British word for drinking, down at the pub and discuss philosophy, and we'll pick a subject. And once we discussed morality, and we're talking about how difficult it is not to tell anyone when you're being morally good. Uh, but that's really being truly good because you are taking away all the personal involvement and the personal kind of congratulations, even self congratulations by telling other people or whatever, or other people congratulating you. You're taking that away from that, so it just becomes you doing this good act, and it is just the act. And here you've got all these people that are being sent into this meat grinder on both sides, but let's look at it from the Ukrainian side here. You're being sent into there. You've got a really high chance of dying, and what you're doing is part of this huge calculation that is calculating, you know, 5,000 Ukrainians lost over this time, 25,000 Russians lost. This was a fantastic result for the Ukrainian army as a whole and has attrited the Russian to a huge degree. But each one of those 5,000 people is a human being with their lives and their expectations and their family and their friends, and same for the 25,000 on the other side. The the there's a culmination of their entire life up to that point. These like holistically, this was a life, and is expunged, and uh, in a calculation, a calculation by generals working out that it's worth doing. Now, I'm not at all arguing with whether it's worth doing or not. When you're in a war, these things are worth doing. You, goodness me, you won't be able to consider the human cost of each individual that you are making decisions on behalf of up and down the front line. You just have a moral and psychological breakdown. So necessarily have to become numbers on a piece of paper, uh, but each one of these has a human story behind it. Uh, but I guess the point I'm trying to say is these people being fed into that, especially when you're talking about the Ukrainians fighting for their homeland, fighting for the good and the right here, like they are on the side of the moral right, in my opinion, very clearly. Then these people truly are heroes, but they are heroes that we probably won't hear. We'll hear about these stories about Bakmut, of course we will, but just that every day there are hundreds of these people being extinguished from the world, and we won't hear about them individually, or we may hear about one or two of them, or 5 or 10 of them, but there are thousands of them being fed into this calculation, sacrificing their lives for their country, for their friends and families, and for their countrymen and women. Just it's incredible. So when we talk about this calculation, I mention this calculation often. It's really worth remembering that calculation is an abstraction of a very human situation involving a vast number of people with lives and everything that goes along with having a life, right? So I think it's just worth remembering that. Um, moving on to something completely different. I did mention this earlier. I showed you this map, I think, this morning in the news video. This is Brady Afric, who does these maps of the trenches being built and fortifications and dragon's teeth and revetments and all sorts. Russian forces continue to dig trenches and build defenses across occupied regions in southern Ukraine. Check out the map of Russia's field fortifications here. Well, let's check out his map then. Let's do what he says. But before we go there, he continues in a couple of pieces. In Kherson Oblast and Crimea, Kherson Oblast and Crimea, Russian forces have fortified intersections and routes along highways leading to the peninsula. So there's a lot of activity going towards Crimea. And then in Zaporizhia Oblast, Russian forces expanded fortifications and defensives near the front line. So this is actually they're doing a lot of building work, defensive building work, right across their front lines, like right where they are, just behind where they are properly fighting. So here's the map. Now, this is quite a lot of work that's been put into this, but you can see it starts getting more and more crowded as you get down towards Crimea. I'd imagine it's quite difficult to get an idea. I don't know. Maybe I'm making that up. An idea of what's going on in Crimea. We have seen, I think, I presume that footage along the beach for the the trenches that I showed you earlier was in both videos today. Was there? I mean, it would seem rather bizarre if they just put trenches there and then left everywhere else untrenched. Then you're like, well, we'll land somewhere else then. This is one of those things that if you're going to do it there, you've got to do it everywhere where it's a possibility to land. Um, But if you come up to the front lines just around Tokmak, you can see these trench lines and defences being surrounding certain towns. Tokmak is one that has been surrounded, and then we've got others around there. Up here we've got Bilmak, surrounded by defences, and these little dots may well these are just I guess data points, but in reality that'll almost certainly be a whole line going there. So don't think that these red points are the whole of the defensive fortifications being built. These are just geolocated positions of certain ones, but I assume that there are effectively these trenches go for a long distance between those points. Um, but anyway, a useful bit of open source intelligence work being done there, so that's fantastic. Thank you to Brady Africk. Ukrainian Special Forces forces soldier on a mission. So Mad Max, or I don't know, motorbike is just another type of vehicle, right? It's just got two wheels rather than four, or six, or eight, or tracks. So whatever. But I don't know. I can imagine it might be quite advantageous to have a whole unit of people like this with manpads, not manpads, ATGMs on the back, so anti-tank guided missiles, and you know useful bit of small arms fire. Well, that looks pretty significant weapon there. Driving at the enemy, being okay. They're not very well protected, but maybe harder to hit. I don't know, or maybe they'll just be easy to mow down with autocannons. I don't know, but or maybe just one of them is far more useful than a whole load of them. I don't know, but there's obviously a use for this, and yeah, I can imagine that being. I've seen sort of dune buggies be used and driving around and doing their thing with various armaments attached to them. This is just another sort of variation of that. And the last thing I'm going to say is just to redirect you yet again to the playlist that I have on my YouTube channel, which at the moment only has 4 things to watch on there, but they are really worth watching. These 3 documentaries and the TED Talk there, really, really high quality stuff. Those 3 documentaries are such well put together pieces of reportage. Absolutely, I will sing their praises to the end. They're really, really good pieces of TV to watch. Uh, anyway, thank you. That's the end of my Ukraine war update extra. I really appreciate all the support you guys give. Huge shout out to new members Peter, Brian Warren, Von Dalen, Leah Kroll, or Von Dalen, I don't know. Brian Ivy, Max Larson, Kvist P, Simon Martin, InQ, J2010, and Da Vinci. I'm going to write all these up and plaster them as an image at the end of the video. Because not this one, but a future one, because I really do appreciate that. And I need to get more content out for my members only, but I just struggle for time in a day. It's just I'm doing all that as humanly possible at the moment, but I will try and squeeze something out extra for you guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Anyway, take care. Speak to you soon.